Awesome. Okay. Cool. Okay. So hi, nice to see you all. I'm Nathan. Maybe first thing just to say is, fuck, I should probably get it so you guys can see the slides too. Cool. Is that good enough? Can everyone see it okay? You guys see it okay? Okay, cool. I'm gonna kind of weirdly yell. I don't like it, but I want to make sure that it at least picks up some audio for the people on the other end. Yeah, nice to meet you all. Amazing. Welcome to Digital Aesthetics. So plan for today is to do a little intro. Basically just what the hell are we going to talk about here? Then we'll do some admin and practicalities. That's the boring stuff where we talk about like how the day-to-day things are going to run, how assessment works, all that sort of stuff. Then we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by digital art. So this will be a little bit more content. This will be a little bit about some of the stuff we were supposed to have read. Briefly, we'll also have, and I mean very brief, it's like 2 or 3 slides, on defining art. This is kind of a background thing. And then lastly, we'll conclude by talking about where we're going to go from here. This is really just going to be, hey, this is what we're going to talk about in the next couple meetings. Yeah, so maybe the place to start is just to say some really, really basic ground rules. I don't even like using that term, but that's the best I can think of. With regards to actually presenting things, this doing it live is not great, but what we're going to try, if it doesn't work, which it's already strongly looking like it's not gonna, my preference would be to pivot to pre-recorded lectures, and then we could do effectively like a 45-minute Q&A meeting where we could have people on Zoom and in person. Again, we can kind of talk about this a little bit as we go along, but I just want to upfront that. Similarly too, I was going to plan on not wearing the mask while I'm doing this. If people feel uncomfortable, that's cool. You can let me know. I'm very happy to wear it. I'm going to sound muffled anyway, so it's fine. Awesome. So let's start by just talking about what digital aesthetics is. And because I'm basic, I'm just going to steal a definition. So digital aesthetics effectively is the study of the nature and appreciative grounds of all those kinds of art whose production and presentation crucially involve computational processes or computer processes. This is from Kathleen and Shelby's SEP article. So cool, what does that actually mean? It means we look at stuff like digital images, so both still and moving ones. We look at digital music and audio design, video games, AR and VR, digital literature, more on that in like 20 slides, and other things. So I think in our topic selections mention things like glitch art and memes and NFTs and stuff like this. Basically, it's any kind of artwork or art process that essentially is somehow computational. There's already a problem with that definition, which is, just to spoil it, computation's cheap. Every single system can be understood as a computational system, because all you have to do is just set up a function, and those are really easy. We can just make them up as we go. So exactly how to figure out what we mean by computer process, but you kind of know what it is, right? It's the stuff that's in front of most of you and that you guys at the other end are on, and right, we have a rough and ready idea. So art that's made using, or that's shown using or displayed using that stuff. So why should we care? Well, here's the big sell. Some people say art creation or digital creation technologies are fundamentally changing our understanding of what is art, who or what counts as an artist, the nature of perceptual experience, how to approach curation. So this is something really interesting when we think about digital works. How to make sense of copyright and originality claims. This is remix stuff. It's old, but digital things make it much more potent. Maybe even how we communicate. So this is something kind of touching on memes. So here's a cheap example. I love this. I'm not sure how this is going to come through on the slides, but we'll see. Oh, nice. Yeah. So can everybody see the AR things on the cards? So this is basically a crappy Magic knockoff game that sold itself by having an AR system attached to it, where you could see the monsters and they would fight using augmented reality. So you watch it through your phone and you would see the monsters fight. Of course, it didn't actually work very well. The Kickstarter fell through and they went to Indiegogo and it failed. But still, neat idea, cool example. So, cool, that's the basic idea. Let me back up for a second. So this is, as I said, the big cell. One of the things we're going to be interested in is the big cell slightly overselling? Like, how big is this digital revolution? Obviously, people who are very heavily invested in digital art really want to big it up, but is it really genuinely giving us something brand new? So this is something we'll talk a little bit about next week and a little bit about this week as well. So cool. Why care as philosophers? Right? This certainly seems like something that artists or historians or media studies people should be interested in. Why us? Why us? Well, again, I'm going to steal from Thompson Jones and Shelby. So basically what we need from philosophers is something like a general conceptual framework to kind of sort this out. If there's anything that philosophers are good at, big if, right? It's something like conceptual distinctions, conceptual clarity, or at least nitpicking. Right? Shallow and pedantic, that's what philosophers are. Notably in that order. Right? So one of the things we can do as philosophers is sort of sort through some of the noise and try and get clearer on some things. And what I hope to do here, what I hope we will do here in this very brief 7 meetings, is to make some first steps towards doing that. That's the real pitch for the class. So what are we actually going to look at? Well, here are some questions that we're not always going to have explicitly, but they're going to be lurking in the background. So the first is there something aesthetically unique or novel about digital art? Art made using computational processes or displayed computationally. Similarly, how should we understand notions like interactivity, immersion, or even authorship in light of the supposed artistic digital revolution? Once we start making digital art, how do we understand these terms? These are all things that kind of come up once we engage in the digital projects. So cool, let's try and make sense of them. Here's the big one though. And this is what we're going to kind of implicitly come back to a lot. How does the fact that a work is digital impact how we should or do aesthetically appreciate it? So we can kind of sharpen that up a little bit by actually stealing something from Thompson Jones, the very end of her chapter. She's talking about a different image, but we can use this one. So she asks, right, if we were to learn that this image, despite how it looks, was produced and screened digitally, would we and should we appreciate the image differently? Differently, say, than we would a traditionally produced photograph with the same look. So first things first, let's have a little bit of levity. What do we think? Digital photo, real life photo? Yeah. This is from This Person Does Not Exist. Yeah. So this is actually produced by a GAN, by a generative adversarial network, based off billions and billions of profile pictures that have been fed to it. Really hard to tell just on the surface. So not only is this like digitally produced and obviously digitally displayed because, you know, slides and everything, but this is like not even a picture or something. This is an image that was completely produced. I think, here's a shot in the dark. I'm going to guess at least some of you are like, cool, now this is going to radically change how I think about it. Maybe it was a really boring picture before that I just scraped from somebody's Facebook, but now it's like, oh, that's really cool. Creepy, but also kind of cool. So at least we have prima facie some reasons to start to think that, hey, learning that this was produced digitally in this really weird digital way might change how we think about this picture, despite the fact that we could have one that looks exactly like it, that, you know, we just took the Polaroid out of the screen. So that's it. That's the kind of question, or that's one of the questions we're going to come back to a lot. Again, digital production, digital presentation. I should say too, for everyone who's on the other end of the Zoom call, if you want to have a question or anything, just put it in the chat. I'm standing right in front of the computer. I can see the chat. So hopefully we'll be able to keep you guys in the loop too. Cool. Okay. So that's the sales pitch for the class. That's what we're going to try and do. What we're interested in. We're going to come back to some more details in a few minutes, but that's basically it. What I want to do next is basically talk you through the boring stuff of like the practicalities, day-to-day stuff. Like what are we going to do, meetings and all that. This is going to go quick because it's in the syllabus. It's kind of boring, but it's worth at least saying. So first things first, here are the learning goals. I'm not going to bother reading them. Basically, it's just, let's learn about digital art. There you go. I said it in 4 different ways. How are we actually going to do it? Well, here's the original thought. We're going to do in-person lectures with streaming concurrent. I'm going to record it. I'm actually in the process of recording this right now. If the recording works, then I'll post it up to YouTube. If there's Q&A from other people, from you guys in the flesh here, I'll try and edit. There's the word. Edit the audio out. Can't promise, but we'll sort of see how it goes. If this doesn't work, or if I get sick, what we'll do is we'll fall back to recorded lectures within the session. That works well as long as we're all pretty cool with it. Again, if that's what we're going to have to do, I'll update you. We'll figure it out as we go along. But it's helpful just to have that foreground and so we know what happens. What are we actually going to do in the sessions? Well, everybody hopefully just show of hands. How many people actually read the reading for today? Ooh, first. No, I assume everyone on Zoom, of course, did. That's really cool. So yeah, basically what we're going to try and do, we'll discuss the material. We'll think through some questions, we'll talk about it together, make some progress towards learning goals. That's something I have to put in because supposedly these are the things that we're really driving. What that really means is that I'm going to get up here and rant at you a bunch. And I want you guys to just chuck in questions, stop me if you have comments, whatever. Just cool. Do it. Right? These are supposed to be interesting and fun. Similarly, I know some other people in our department are very adamant about not using the devices. I say bring damn devices. Bring all the devices. As long as you're not bothering anyone else around you, like don't watch a movie while you're here. If you do, put your headphones on, right? But bring stuff. Kind of the point of this is to look at the weirdness of digital art. So sometimes that means like, hey, we just talked about something and here's a really cool example. That's a good thing. That's kind of the point. So yeah, I think I just wanted to mention that. Same thing too, people on Zoom, if you're there, feel free to drop links in. I probably won't open them for safety reasons, but yeah, feel free. Maybe just before going on, should ask any questions on that, on the sort of what we'll do in these meetings sort of thing. Well, if you have any, just chuck them in the chat or raise your hands, we'll talk about them. Cool. Okay. So probably also very interested in what assessment's going to be. So basically, you write a paper together. 2,000 to 3,000 word argumentative paper. Notably, it has to be an argumentative paper. So what this means is that you'll need to have something like a kind of research question that you can set yourself. I'm not going to dictate it to you. Then you need to have a thesis statement that is your answer to the question. And the bulk of the paper needs to be, and here's why you should take this answer to this question. Notably, because I'll already assume it's an interesting question. You don't really need to do a lot about like why this is a really relevant question or anything like this. Just dive in. The key part for me is the articulating an argument. I want you to argue for whatever thesis you want to defend. I'll post a little rubric about this. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the coming, well, next week, basically. Let's say in the coming weeks, literally next week. But I have a whole rubric so you can see it and spell it out. If there are any questions, we can talk about it. I'm also very happy. I'll put forward some sample questions that you might want to pick. Again, let me emphasize, might, you do not have to pick one. Okay? Pick whatever you want. It doesn't even necessarily have to be on one of the topics that we've covered. As long as it's broadly related to digital aesthetics, cool, we're good. Run it by me first, but be safe, sane, and sensible. It's due, well, at the moment it's scheduled to be due on the 8th of April. I should maybe pause and ask, how many other classes have you guys been to this week? Just one, okay, a couple. One thing to note, found out relatively recently, seems like everybody this block picked this day for their essay deadline. So I'm gonna probably move it. I've got to check with the coordinator if that's okay, but that's my wife, so I suspect I'll be able to just ambush her while we're having dinner and do some moving around there. So heads up for this. This is the current one. If anything, it will be moved back. But again, we'll sort of come back to that when we talk about the rubric. I'll upload paper guidelines and assign in the next week or so. Actually, probably tomorrow. The assignment's already up. You'll submit it via Canvas just because it's so much easier than trying to do it by hard copy. Details are there. You can check it out. Right. Yeah, before going on, any questions about the assessment? Absolutely. You should feel free to do that. Feel free to send me drafts, send me outlines. I am very, very, very happy to read that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just better. Then I don't end up having to like, God, this is, well, I would never say this. I will sit at home and say, God, this is terrible. Let's go for the research. Yes, it saves everyone time. Cool. Any other questions? So I'm going a little quick because I want to get to the actual fun stuff. Ooh, good question. Annalinda asks if it's okay to follow the course if you're not from the Philosophy Master. Technically, that's fine. I think if you want to get credit, you have to check with your relevant exam board. But it's no problem with me, especially if you're on Zoom. If you want to just hang out, listen, join in, that's perfectly fine with me. Give a thumbs up. Okay. So yeah, good. Okay. Here's maybe the most important practicality. If you have any accessibility issues, like, you get sick, you don't have to tell me. You just say, hey, I can't come to class. Oh, hey, for some reason, I can't download the PDFs. Just any kind of issues like this, let me know as soon as you can. Right? We'll figure something out. We'll find a way to make it work. That's, yeah, the biggest thing. Relatedly, there might be difficulties. Look, what was it? Yesterday, there was something like 100,000 new positive cases. So we can pretty much by the numbers say we're all going to fucking get sick at some point. At that point, if it happens, okay, we'll figure something out. That's just, we have to make do. Importantly, if you fall behind or something happens, it's cool. Don't freak out. It's going to be okay. Material will be made available. I'm around to talk about stuff. If you have any issues, just shoot me an email or message me on Canvas. There are the discussion forums if you have questions that we didn't get to cover in this, right? Right now, I think the last time I looked was yesterday. There was the, hey, here's some weird stuff kind of thread. Feel free to open other threads if you have other ideas, want people to talk. Cool. Try and keep it, PG. That's all. There's also Canvas chat, which is available. It's just a terrible version of Discord. I've literally never seen anyone ever use it. But it's there if you want. Right? So yeah, that's basically it for admin and practicalities. I hope that's sort of clear, fairly straightforward. Again, before moving on, any questions on that stuff? One thing I do have, let me ask you guys a question. And this is mostly for the people in the room and not on Zoom, sorry. Um, one of the things we have to decide is how we want the meetings to go. So, we have basically like an hour and a half-ish. We can kind of use as we want. Really, this sort of breaks down to two possibilities. We can go for about 45 minutes, take a break, and then start up again. Or we can just go for a while and then end about 10 minutes early. Either one is perfectly fine with me. But of course, what we can do is figure out day to day as well. So let me ask, while we're here, do you guys have preferences for that today? Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, cool. So one thing to note is I'll get on my hobby horse and just get ranting. If it's time, just feel free to be like, hey, can you shut up and let's go to a break? Like, that's cool. So we'll aim to go for about another 20 minutes or so, and then we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break. Okay? Again, that's something we can kind of figure out each meeting exactly how it goes. Okay. Cool. Okay. So that's the big course cell and the admin out of the way. Let's talk about digital art. So what I want to really do here is just kind of get a grip on what digital art is and why it might be interesting. So this is kind of cycling back around to the very first proper slide. We're talking about what digital aesthetics is. So digital art, again, following Thompson Jones and Shelby Moser and other people, we can say digital art is art that essentially relies on computer-based digital encoding, either in terms of its production or in terms of its presentation. More on that in just a minute. So notably, digital encoding can occur at lots of different levels or at different steps in the kind of art making process. And I think Thompson Jones's three, I'm just going to call her Catherine. Catherine's three examples from her chapter really nicely show different ways or different kind of degrees that you might be engaged in this digital process. So here's our first one. I literally could not find a copy of this other than taking it from the cover of her book. This is actually Creve Ruins' Stills in Flux. It's supposed to be an emotion, hence the influx. But of course, right, it's not even on the website that's in the book. That doesn't work anymore because it uses Flash. And Shock Horror Flash died a while ago. So what is Stills in Flux? Well, this is actually, so Ruins took 35mm end pieces. So basically the bits at the very end and beginning of a roll of film that get exposed to light when you make the film and process. She cut those out, kind of jammed them together, and then ran them in through, I think it was actually iMovie, but something like Photoshop. So you get this, which is actually produced by real light hitting real film, but she's blurred it together using digital processing. And then of course, layered them up to give you a movie, which I can't show you because I couldn't find it, using, again, a digital process. So you have at bottom, physical photographs or something very much like it, right? Real film being hit by real light. And then we're taking digital images of them and sequencing them. So there's our first one. Here's the second one. And I'm not sure how well the GIF's gonna come through on Zoom. So this is Julian Oki. This is one of his landscape films. I forget what this one's called. I couldn't find the one that Thompson Jones talks about, again, because the link she gives doesn't work. So what he does here is he takes a digital photograph, then crosses it through, oh God, what's it called? I used to remember it as squiggle vision. So what you do is you take a still, effectively, a digital still, and then you hand animate over it. You trace the lines, you color it in. But again, not really by hand so much as on something like an iPad or something like this. And then he animates, he uses some GIF editors to animate this. Also, I should say, I'm going to call it GIF, even though I know technically that's wrong because it sounds stupid. Shots fired. Okay. So what do we have? Well, in this case, we have a digital image to begin with. And then it's processed digital, right? So again, there's kind of engagement with this digital production techniques broadly all the way through. What's interesting though is, of course, he's still using basically like store-bought technology. Here's a fun one. I cannot find the gift of this either. So this is Simon Junior's window. This is cool because what Simon did is actually program the whole thing. He programmed it in character different language. Remember? So he took the top, basically just the monitor piece. Better. Let's start again. He took a laptop, effectively broke the hinges, stripped off the stuff on the outside, has the back of the laptop taped to the back of this monitor. And the monitor is running his code. What does the code do? Well, it starts off by drawing a rectangle, filling it in with a color, and then it rotates it to a random degree, expands it out, and fills in a new color. So you get this kind of constantly descending series of parallelograms. And what's really neat here is it's what we might think of as procedural art. The work isn't a particular image. In fact, the work is this whole process. It's the code being activated in such a way as to produce this sequence of events. In fact, arguably in this case, it's the whole setup, because he even designed the little encasement in order to kind of mirror or mimic the images that are supposed to be produced. So what's neat here in Simons's case is he didn't even bother using like store-bought stuff. It's sort of, well, let's do all the hard work. Let's code it from the beginning. Let's even manipulate the hardware in the way that I want it. Let's build this thing from not quite scratch, but pretty damn close. So what's interesting is in all three cases, Bruins's work, Alfie's work, and Simons's work, we're getting different degrees of digitalization, if you like, or different digital production elements entering in. But in all cases, it looks like we should probably call them digital art, at least arguably. Again, forgive the kind of poor presentation. That's just because I can't, ironically enough, find images of them on the internet. So these are digital artworks. Why? Well, arguably they're digital in virtue of the technology that they're produced and or presented with. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Absolutely.
I would argue that maybe this books isn't necessarily digital art, or wouldn't be considered that anymore. Because I can imagine that, I don't know when it came out, but at the time that it came out, it was
2012, I think.
right. But I think, I mean, I know a lot of artists who basically film on film.
Yeah.
And then Ross says in Premiere Pro, when they show the movie, it's not really said that it's digital art. And anymore, it has a lot of emphasis that it's filmed on film.
Yeah,
I
good.
think that's strange.
I think there's something really interesting there about even like how much commitment to this digital stuff that we have to have for it to be properly called digital art. Like maybe this is something where, hey, in the late 90s, if you are making, Thompson Jones talks about the algorithmic artwork, right? Where they had, I forget what they're called. So you, in effect, what you have is a little robot arm just drawing according to a set algorithm. And that's not really digital so much as just like, dude, I had a spirograph too. Like, so I think there's something interesting here about a sliding scale. And actually, this kind of comes to where I was going, so that's very helpful, right? Which is, right, so I'm basically stealing this from Thomson-Jones. Two things to note. First, she doesn't have the presented bit in at least her initial characterization. She just has the produced bit, which is interesting because arguably at least some of the cases we might think of as digital art are going to be so just because of the way they're presented, not just because of the way they're produced. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Similarly, it seems like presentation alone isn't going to be sufficient to make something digital art, because otherwise, right, just, well, cool, I watch Columbo on my laptop. Columbo is definitely not digital art, but the fact that it's being presented to me via MP4 files, something's gone wrong there. So this is one point where right off the bat, you can already see there's a lot of fuzziness. Conceptual clarity would be very helpful. Hence, hey, what we're supposed to do. So let's kind of unpack this thought, because we'll kind of keep dealing with this for the rest of today. So here's, I think, what's lurking behind. No, what I think this is basically just what Thomson-Jones says. When we're thinking about any artwork, how we appreciate it begins with a recognition that it's a work. That it's the product of maybe an artistic or some kind of activity, making it something to be appreciated as something like an achievement. Again, big star on that because we'll come back to some weird cases. So the idea here is that, well, there's some kind of efforts involved or achieved by the artists, and we think about the tools they're using, the materials they're using, right? And maybe some appreciative conventions or historical circumstances. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that you created this?
Yeah.
I would say he constructed this. That he created it. And if you say that it needs to be maybe or like something that is made or achieved, he wrote something down and someone else would make. And then I need to do visual art, conceptual art. Well,
importantly, he writes the program that then produces the images, right? So he took some hardware that someone else made. But of course, hardware is just part of it. The hardware is actually actualizing the particular algorithms that he wrote. You see, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So maybe here's a comparison, right? I mean, we might think, take any great artist. We'll come back to Holbein in a few minutes, but Holbein's The Ambassadors is an oil painting. The oils in the canvas he didn't make. He used them and applied them in different kinds of ways. So I guess we might push on the point and say, well, Simon has taken this existing machine, recoded it, changed it pretty significantly to do something different. But I get the kind of pushback here. So yeah, maybe we'll table it and come back. But I like to push. Okay. So yeah, I think too, the kind of points here about efforts and achievement and this artistic activity, hopefully everyone is already immediately thinking again of like ready-mades, Duchamp, stuff like this. Clearly there are going to be points where this breaks. And this is maybe where something like appreciative conventions or historical circumstances will come into play. And maybe I think this could be a point as you were pushing on like that. So what's interesting is if we buy this kind of line, this sort of medium-based aspect of appreciation, then it looks like reflections on the kinds and significance of choices available to an artist when they're making their work is going to contribute to the appreciation of the work. Basically, if we're aware of the stuff they could do, how difficult it is or how easy it would be to do the things that they've done, that's going to impact how aesthetically interesting we find the work. I think there's something to that. We'll push on it a little bit. But again, I think there's maybe something to that. So what's interesting about it is it suggests that something like the ontology of a work can be at least partially responsible for setting appropriate appreciation forms. Again, I've spoiled it already. This is a sort of medium-based aesthetic appreciation field. So medium here, of course, being, the sort of the vehicle that's delivering the work. What's it made of? Film, some sort of visual image. Is it produced using just a machine? Was it coded from scratch? Was it made using Photoshop? These things seem to kind of matter, or at least potentially can matter for our aesthetic evaluation of a work. Again, if you want some argument for it, just go back to the picture of the person who doesn't exist. Finding out that that was produced by, again, I'm pretty sure it's going to change some people's opinions about the picture. So yeah, sorry, yeah. Okay. So here's a kind of maybe a framework to get us going here. So Kendall Walton, in a very famous paper from 1978, talks about categories of art. And according to Walton, what aesthetic features a work has are partially dependent on what category or genre the work is an instance of. So, right, categories can be quite broad, so an oil painting, or they can be quite narrow, so a noir detective novel. Again, these are sort of flexible. We can also stack them. We might think that, oh, The Big Sleep, right, this is a noir detective novel, isn't very good literature, but it's an amazing example of this noir detective novel. Which category we're thinking about it in terms of might impact how we aesthetically evaluate. So here's Walton's thought. Works have three sorts of features: standard features, variable features, and contra-standard features. Standard features are basically those that, well, works in this genre or category tend to have. Variable features, well, these are the sorts of properties that works in this category, shockingly, can vary in. And then finally, contra-standard features are features that works in this category tends to not have. So first thing to note here, we'll unpack these in a second, right? But contra-standard features, if you have one of these, that doesn't automatically block you from being in a category. It just means most of these sorts of things don't tend to have it. Here's Walton's example. Everybody know what this is? Yeah, it's Guernica, right? Guernica. So he says, cool, right? As a painting, this has one pretty standard feature. It's flat, or mostly flat. It's pretty much a 2D image. It's painted onto the canvas. What are the variable features? The particular lines, the color distribution, the images that are actually depicted using the paint. It has a few contra-standard features. For example, its size. It's fucking massive. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. Also, it's not very terribly colorful. Not strictly contra-standard, but maybe you might think. But imagine there's a weird alien civilization, and they all make sort of bas-reliefs. Right? Everyone know what I mean by that? Sort of, basically they're carved down. So you start off with a flat piece, and then you can carve in or carve out, adding material outside, to give you some sort of three-dimensional surface. Here's the cool thing. Every single relief that they make, when viewed from a certain angle, looks exactly like this. So the standard feature for these new category of art, which we'll call Guernicas, is to look exactly like this if you're seeing it in a flat view. The variable features are the level of depth, the comparison cases between how you get to this point of view. Do we see the idea? So cool. What's weird, and of course, no, this is an absolutely silly category. It's just meant to sort of show the point. What would be the variable features here? Well, it ain't looking like this. It ain't having these lines and these colors. It's about depth. and how you play around with the depth. Something that would not be the case for this, right? Because remember, it's basically flat. So if we think about this qua Guernica, this new weird category, again, we're making up, this would actually be a really boring piece because it's flat. Oh, cool, this is the minimal effort. Or maybe, it's something making an artistic statement about, hey, we can flatten it all out, man. We'd have to work it out. But what's interesting, again, there is it all depends on which features we're taking to be the standard ones, which features we're taking to be the variable ones, which features we're taking to be contrastandard. Again, kind of a jokey case, but I hope we can sort of see it, ironically, in stark relief. Whole thing is just a setup for that part. So yeah, why mention Walton? Well, I think this is a really handy way to make sense of some of the things that we might be interested in here. When we think about digital visual art, it might have different standard features than analog visual art. Same thing with variable, same thing with contrastandard. And I think this actually ties back with something you were mentioning earlier. We might even think that certain kinds of production techniques are going to be standard features for what we might think of as digital art. God, 10 years ago. That's sad, right? That have moved away. They're no longer the standard features anymore, just simply because maybe other parts of production techniques become easier. So this gives us a flexible framework, but it still, at the end of the day, gives us a medium-based aesthetic appreciation, because the medium is going to be part of the relevant categories. So before we move on, does it kind of make sense? Do we sort of see the Walton view? Now, again, let me stress, this is just one way to kind of hash out this medium-based aesthetic appreciation. I think it's a very nice one. It's not the only one. But it seems to capture some of the squiggly, slidey standards that might be in play here. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and take our break before we launch into the next bit? That seems like a nice thing. Is everyone cool with a 7-minute break? Until like, say 38, give or take? Cool. Okay, let's rock it once more. So, yeah, I think that again, the Walton stuff is maybe something we can kind of see lurking in the background when we're thinking about this medium-based notion of appreciation. If I start to walk around, flag me down, remind me, face this way so they can hear me. Sorry, okay, so cool. What we might think then, once we have that medium-based stuff in the background, is that it looks like the digital, exactly how we're going to understand that, to be doing, is tied to new creative possibilities and challenges. Some good, some bad. And again, in order to get that, we really need to buy the idea that something like the underlying ontology is going to impact how we do, maybe how we should appreciate the produced works. So let's think about the bad first. So here's the kind of bad or the negative or the challenge. And this is, again, we're just going to kind of elucidate some issues, and then we'll talk briefly about what we might do to push back on. So I think the big, deep, dark challenge, and this is roughly in line with Catherine, is that the move from the analog to the digital involves some kind of aesthetic loss. And I think the loss is motivated in two different ways, or can be motivated in two different ways. Here's the first one. Remember that thing we said just a second ago about effort and achievement? Well, once we start moving to the digital, once we allow these digital production tools and techniques to be involved, it just becomes too easy. So ease of use, expansion of options undermines in some sense the aesthetic value of the works produced. Yes.
But I think that also comes out a lot about the arts because I think that a lot of that art, like coding, something scratch, and even if it's like digital normal art, but you have to have it still, how is that you also
Yeah, good.
the iPad doesn't
Yes, you got to do something, right? Yeah, good. So importantly, right, we're gonna spell out the objections. I think you're exactly right, just for what it's worth. And I think this is the kind of thing, much as you just said, that a lot of people really new to digital art are going to immediately think, like, cool, you just ran a Photoshop filter. It doesn't make you an artist. Hey, cool, you found the Vaporwave Instagram filter. Cool. Yeah, so maybe one of the things we can immediately say back is maybe sometimes, but not always. Take Simon's case, right? That window. Cool, the dude programmed it up. Like he didn't even bother with any store-bought tools. It seems really weird to say ease of use there. I do put a lot of effort in. Right? And I think the idea here, so Thompson, Jones, and Moser put it nicely, is that look, the production of a work relies on computer automation, and many of the tasks, both manual and cognitive, traditionally involved in making art. And that seems somehow bad. That's the thought. Again, hashtag not all digital art, but at least we can sort of see, I think many people will feel the intuitive pull here. There's ways to fight it. And one of the immediate things to point out is, again, just to go back, hey, if it's medium based, then this doesn't even make sense as an objection. Because we might think that there are different categories. There's digital visual art, and there's analog visual art. And those are two different things. One way to respond. Not the only way, but something interesting. A slightly more weighty one, at least on the first glance, is that digital encoding necessarily involves information loss. Or as Thompson Jones puts it in her book, digital is always a poor substitute for the analog. And the reason here is basically technical. The digital is essentially discrete, whereas the analog is dense. That is, right, if we think about the natural numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? We're always counting on the whole numbers, never going in between. But if we think about the reals, we can get all of the decimalizations in between. There's a hell of a lot more there. In fact, there's infinitely more between 0 and 1 than there are the number of naturals. little set theoretic bit of lesson for you there, right? So the thought is the analog is dense. It doesn't have discrete units. It gives you a whole varying range. The digital is essentially discrete. Now, of course, the pushback to that is, cool, do you know how many pixels are on this thing? Even if it is discrete, it's so discrete that we literally cannot possibly tell the difference. Anyone who tells you they can is lying. Or they're not viewing it the way they're supposed to, they're slowing it down or something. But there's something there, right? There's something there to this thought. By moving from the dense to the discrete, the continuous to the discrete, we are, by definition, going to lose something. There's going to be some rounding, there's going to be some fudging. But as we get better and better and better and better, and more fine details of the discrete, it's going to go away. Or at least becomes so hard to tell the difference. Have you guys seen the movie I Heart Huckabees? So there's a bit near the end where Marky Mark and Dustin Hoffman, their characters, are having a debate, and they're talking about whether space is discrete or continuous, and Marky Mark keeps talking about like, oh, you can see the things and then there's gaps. And then Dustin Hoffman pushed back and he's like, oh, if you look, but there's just more little tiny things in between. And he's like, yeah, and then you see smaller gaps and smaller things in between. That's basically what we've got here. Basically, as the digital tech gets better, the discrete elements become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. The gaps get more and more and more and more refined to the point where it's pretty hard to tell the difference, at least perceptually. But I think we can probably see the best of this, or maybe the most nuanced version of this objection in Rodovik. Rodovik is talking about digital photography and about photography in analog, so film. He's got views. He says analog photography, an analog photograph is an isomorphic transcription of its subject. I'd already have some red flags there. But he says a digital photograph is a data output with a symbolically mediated link to its subject. That is somehow right. When we take a picture with film, I'm getting just an isomorphic depiction of the thing that I was pointing the camera at. But when I take a digital photograph, what I'm getting is, hey, there was a bunch of light sensors inside that then are mapped to a bitmap, and then it's being mapped to an image. Yeah. Good. So isomorphic means mapping one to one. So whenever there's, say, we'll talk about it in terms of points, whenever there's some kind of point value in the real world thing that we're looking at, it's going to have that exact same thing, or at least something that's directly mapped on the physical substance I'm taking the picture. So that, yeah, good. Thank you for asking. So again, an idea. So the worry is there's going to be a discontinuity here. There's some kind of translation that's going on. The data output that is our digital photograph, right? It's mediated in some kind of way, and that means it's bad. It's not as good as this beautiful, again, just use the phrase, isomorphic transcription that I'm getting with my analog picture. So here's the basic thought, as far as I can see. Thought is something like, even if a digital image looks just like an analog one, even if it's perceptually indistinguishable, its digital nature is going to impact how we ought to appropriately engage with it. And notably, if we follow Rodovik, in a negative way. It's never going to be as good. Now, we might, again, take issue with these points here. In fact, I think that's really plausible. I think maybe Rodovik's first point is just false, because anyone who's actually developed photographs knows that it's a process. Right? When you're processing the negative, you can do a bunch of things to it to then get a very interesting output. It is not just a perfect isomorphic transcription. Photography is a process art. It's not just a product art.
About loss of I think what I need to ask because it's very quality. So, at least when it comes to photography, I can still
Yeah, I think there's a weird personal anecdote of this. So I'm American, as you maybe can tell from my accent and sound. In the last year in American football, so the NFL, they've started this thing when people score touchdowns, doesn't really matter what that is, right? They have this really super HD camera, and they zoom in on the dude who scored the touchdown. And honest to God, it's so immaculate and precise and upscaled, it looks like a cartoon. It's too good. but it's not, it's not a digital image. It's just a really, really super high quality camera. And it messes with me. So it's kind of the flip, I guess, of the case we're talking about. But I think you're right. There's going to be, maybe the thing to think about with Rodovik's objection is it's not meant to just be, hey, as it stands right now. This is meant to kind of, regardless of how nuanced and detailed and upscaled the digital tech is, it's always going to be worse. It's one thing if it is, in fact, just, it doesn't look as good. Even if we grant Rodovik his objection to digital imagery, it's not clear how far we can take it with other digital work. So arguably, literature is literature, regardless of whether you handwrote it or used Word. One thing we'll come back to in a couple slides is maybe literature is literature, regardless of whether somebody wrote it or whether it was algorithmically produced. Something to debate. But I think this is maybe the best or the clearest articulation of this kind of worry that somehow the digital is always going to be aesthetically worse off. At least as it's said with regards to digital imagery. Here's another fun example to get the same thing. I have some friends who are dead set on records. They say, right, vinyl sounds better than anything else. They're full of it, but that's fine. So the idea here is something very much like this. There's a particular sound that vinyl captures, or audio recorded onto vinyl captures, that no matter how nuanced our MP3 compression is, it's never going to give us the same sound quality. Again, I think eye rolling is exactly the right response there. It's like, my dude, you just have a particular sound you're used to. You'll have the same problem when you change your headphones. So we might think that maybe there's something here, again, to kind of go back to the Walton, something here about an issue with regards to the features that we're taking as standard, pegging as contra-standard. Maybe we actually do think this is something deep and dark. Again, something we'll kind of have lurking in the background as we go forward. But let's look at the flip, right? So what's the gain? We talked about maybe a problem. What do we get? What's good about moving to the digital? Well, arguably, we get new kinds of art and artistic effects. First one's really easy. We've already seen it. It's something like Simons's window, like this procedural art, where it's not just something that's following an algorithm. Again, we already had that with Spirograph. But it's where we can literally program up some big system, and the system is now going to follow a procedure. The image produced is not the work. It is, in fact, the whole process involved in producing the images. That's the work. So it's not any given snapshot of window, it's the whole thing, all the way down to the code. That's something we can't have non-digitally because, well, code.
Procedural art, but then the thing that produces would be the artist, which means Simon Space to that platform. Now, I argued before that it could be for conceptual art,
Yeah.
that's the concept of wrote that.
Yeah, good. I think we can actually kind of fit either way to read it. Right? So we might think if it turns out that what Simons is doing is conceptual art, then in effect what we've given with this sort of digital art or new means of production is allowing for new kinds of conceptual art. So my conceptual art now is going to be realized in terms of this code. And I'm going to send it off to this laptop that I've deconstructed or taken apart in order to realize it. So that's still a new possibility.
That's the procedure. Not normally,
In some sense. I mean, I think, so this is actually something we're going to come back to when we think about authorship. There's really fun ones. Are people familiar with Damien Hirst? Right? And Hirst's like how he pays a ton of people to basically produce the artwork. I think those are clear cases where there's no sense in which you should be called the author. Again, author here being a generic sense for like creator. In the Simons case, I can see the pushback. And I think there'd be ways where what we need to do is articulate what it means to be an author. So this might be good to come back to in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But yeah, I like it. I like it. So kind of running, picking up a few other points, gains or potential gains. One that's interesting is we seem to gain maybe something like a distinct aesthetic, a distinct look. Thompson-Jones talks about a purification, a defamiliarization, or a depersonalization. Now, arguably, I think this isn't something that we're essentially getting from the digital. It's something that happens. We could get it in young. Here's the cool one, though. Let's flip around the objection. Remember, the objection earlier was, hey, ease of use means it's less aesthetically valuable. No, ease of use and expansion of options increases aesthetic value. First one is there's a kind of delegation where the machine is doing some of the work. Maybe some of the realization, maybe some of the actual kind of conceivability work, the cognitive work. But according to Zellinger, right, this is an act of liberation that quickens the imagination. And we might push back and say, well, no, actually, my dude, that's just you know, farming out some work that you should be doing to something else. Here's, I think, a really nice point, though. And this comes back, I think, to something I don't remember. Once we actually have digital tools, things become easier. It becomes a whole lot easier to make some changes to your film, say. Why is that interesting? That means that what happens in the end, you have a lot more responsibility for. Because you could cut and edit with basically no loss and very minimal time. Not like before when, oh crap, I cut the film the wrong way, this scene's gone. You have so much more technical capacity, technical ability. The technical difficulty, as it got in the palette here, is kind of removed or diminished. So as Thompson-Jones and Moser say, right, when we properly appreciate a digital movie, part of what we need to appreciate is the significance of any scene or sequence looking the way it does. Because it's so easy to make it look different. It means that you have more choice, which means picking this particular one matters. Not that it was forced upon me because of the technical limitations at the time. So let's put that in Walton's terms. Way more features can become variable. We're not just locked in because of the medium that we're using. That's really cool. Even if we already think that there's something kind of weird and less aesthetically valuable about using these digital tools, the fact that more stuff can be done should already be some kind of twinging up some neat things. Some artists agree with this point. I don't know if people watch the video from Joel Haver. He's hilarious. This is a video about how he makes his animations. He has a bit about midway through the video where he's talking about all technology as a cheat code. Anytime technology makes art easier to learn, more accessible, more efficient, we should applaud it because art should be in the hands of everyone and we shouldn't have to break our backs and our wallets and waste our lives to make it. We should feel good when we do that. So Haber's idea here is basically kind of that point we just talked about. Right? It's a combination of this delegation point and that the digital tools give you a whole bunch of new ways to go. Here's the other real fun one. It at least opens up the possibility of new artists. So I've got Hatsune Miku up there. I have me making a glitch art version of Lovecraft. There's another one. So the slides will be posted, or I think they're already posted. Are people familiar with NaNoWriMo? So this is the national novel writing month. So NaNoGenmo is the National Novel Generation. So where what you do is you code up an algorithm that will then produce a novel. And you can refine it over the course of the month. Of course, it's really easy to run the algorithm. It usually takes about 10 to 15 seconds. There are some very cool ones that were produced. Most of them are garbage, of course. Some of them are really neat. We'll come back to whether computers can make art, but at least what we're getting is new works. Whether they count as art, we'll talk about it. Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. So again, what are we kind of doing? We're thinking about maybe what's the negative? The negative is, well, we're moving to this necessarily discrete ease of use, or at least somehow making easier to use art creation tools, and thinking about what's possibly nice, what's gained, new possibilities, new options, maybe even new artists, new art, or at least new works. So here's a fun example. Anybody know what this is? Kind of. I mean, if you look at them closely, you will see that there's some very weird things going on, like say Garfield meeting in the face, and Odie being some kind of weird, horrific thing. These are procedurally generated Garfield cartoons. So this is another instance where somebody took again, made a generative antagonistic network, and fed every single Garfield Sunday strip in, and then just had it produce like 1 billion of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was in somewhere. And 2 years ago, there was this image that comes on there, and the caption said, maybe one thing in this photo. And then you'd be like, this is easy. And then you started looking at the photo, and you couldn't name a single thing in the photo. And it was like a compile of all of these Christmas tree photos. At first glance, it looks like a normal photo. And when you look at it,
Yeah.
so it's almost like a Lovecraftian.
Yes.
Like, when you look at it, you can't describe it.
Yeah. You see beyond the pale.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't, let's be clear. I don't think that these are like, hey, we've got a new cartoonist on our hands. But maybe if it keeps working, it'll get to the level of like the person that we saw earlier, where it can start producing Garfield comics. I mean, Jim Davis isn't very good anyway, so cool. Why might as well have an algorithm do it. Yes.
Is it like that, if you say 5,000 something like that, something did that happen?
We might think, right? I think what's interesting is in these cases, it's not completely random. We're training our algorithms to try and produce something. In this case, we're feeding it information and we're trying to get it to produce something that looks like these. And many of these, I mean, at first glance, many of them do. And then, God, no, some of these are really off. So here's a different one. Are people familiar with this? So this is the Comte de Bellamy, produced by Obvious. Obvious is based in Amsterdam. They're an algorithmic art company. So what they do is they write, again, it's another GAN, another adversarial network. They feed in a whole ton of old school oil portraits. And then what it does is it produces digital images and then prints them out using a 3D printer and genuine oil onto canvas. So this is a real painting. Well, this is actually an image of the real painting that was produced from a 3D printer based on the algorithm. This is the output of the algorithm. It has a whole slew, this whole family de Bellamy. So this is an interesting one because it's an actual physical object. It's not just like this weird stuff. Right? It's a genuine painting that was hung and sold and things like this. Again, interesting question here about whether we should call this art. Who counts as the author, right? Is it the system? Is it the people who program the algorithm? Again, something kind of interesting here. It's a neat case. And arguably what we get is a new work. Whether we want to call it an artwork or not, We'll talk about it in just a second. I just love it. I love it. Great. So again, one thing we maybe seem to be gaining with these tools, as well as the ease of use, is a whole slew of new works that are just being generated by my laptop. Here's another thing we seem to gain. And I think Thompson-Jones sells this a little bit too hard. She says we get works with features that couldn't have, we get works with features that they couldn't have were they handmade. I take it what she means here is like an analog. So here's an attempt to spell that out. We can think about this with the sorts of properties that digital works more easily have than non-digital works do. Now, no, I said more easily, because I think analog ones can have these features. It's just a little bit easier to do it digitally. One is interactivity. Now, notably, interactivity is something that can come in degrees. We have something like To the Moon, which is an amazing video game. There really isn't much to it. It's more like a visual novel, but not quite. Maybe an interactive film. There's a few bits where you can do things, but you can't really change much. Contrast that with a proper video game, something like Spec Ops: The Line, where through the playing, you actually can kind of change a significant amount of the content of the game. Or contrast this with the ambassadors. I mentioned we come back to Holbein. So here's the ambassadors. There's a sense in which this is interactive. Here's the sense. Depending on how you look at it, you get very different sort of feels about it. So there's this weird smudgy thing. This is another one of the huge paintings. And the aim of it is you're supposed to come up and look at it from way down here, basically right about where I'm at. And when you do, you can see what the smudgy thing is. Does everybody know what it is? It's a skull, right? It's supposed to be a memento mori. So it's interactive in a kind of minimal way. You can change your angle, change how you're appreciating it. But no, that's very different than the sort of interactivity that To the Moon or Spec Ops has. It's not just changing your engagement, your angle of how you're perceiving it, you're somehow changing the very content. Be more like if you went to the ambassadors and you painted over the skull. So immersiveness is something that digital works are easier to do because you can have the sort of responsiveness the computer gives you that handmade stuff wouldn't. Similarly, you can also get immersiveness. Now, here it's not so much the fact that it's computational as other visualization images, technology. So this is something where AR and VR have a big leg up. So Undersea Rec is one of my friend Neil's favorite tools when people first go into VR. He puts them in. You're standing on the deck of a sunken ship, and you sort of look around, and you've got full 360-degree movement, and you can see all these fish swim by and everything. And what happens about 30 or 40 seconds in is this giant whale comes up behind you. It's back left. And it makes a huge noise. Right? It starts singing. And 75 to 80% of the people the first time they put in it hear the noise, turn around and just go, holy shit. Freak out because you think, oh my God, there's this giant thing coming at me. So there's a kind of immersiveness there. And what's driving the immersiveness? Well, the quality of the visuals, the quality of the sound, the responsiveness of the system. Again, a whole lot easier with digital tools, not impossible with physical stuff. Difficult, let's put it that way. So we'll talk a little bit more about these features, these ones in particular next week. But one of the things that the digital artwork let us do, or digital technologies let us do, is produce works with these features. Again, not that it's impossible to do it in an analog way. It's just a lot harder. This is why I think Thompson-Jones's point about couldn't be done in handmade ways, maybe a bit much. So what we get, I think, is we get a kind of, well, a beautiful little table. We have digital art being something that's either digitally produced or digitally presented, or maybe both. And again, we could, maybe do some demarcations and drawing out and pull things apart. So we have works that are clearly produced digitally and done for digital presentation. Agatha Appears is a good one. That was one I was on the reading list. It doesn't really work anymore because it was written from Netscape, like, God, in the late 90s. It's old. We also have things that were digitally produced, but designed for non-digital presentation. So this is, again, Le Comte de Bellarmine. Remember that algorithmically written and then 3D printed portrait painting. And kind of going around. There's obviously non-digital presentation and production. Cool, that's basically any just straight up analog artwork. One I'm interested in, and this maybe kind of comes back to something already, is whether there are things that are made with analog tools, but specifically done then for digital presentation or display. I think cases here might be easier to find using audio, but I'm curious. Yeah.
I follow visual artists online, and a lot of them actually use analog tools. They use then expand their artwork to Twitter or sell online.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I worry about that because that would make Guernica a digital work, because I showed you a digital picture of it. So I mean, there's something, again, there's something fishy about what we mean by presented digitally here. Yeah.
The goal is still to digital based music.
Yeah.
Maybe that one is
Well, okay, so this is again where I start to worry. Then that means like anybody who records on reel to reel and then distributes their things on like not Spotify anymore, but Apple Music or something like that. Maybe those particular files are digital, but it doesn't really feel like the work itself is digital in some way. So again, I think there's something funny here. Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Well, I'm working on a project right now where that's live, the real bodies, but then the screens are there presented on that view, and they see that this back.
Oh, cool.
And then I said, depending on the audience surrounded by huge screens of real people, because it's so larger than life.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be interpretation.
Yeah, I think that kind of tracking something interesting there, because it's essentially like the mode of presentation essentially involves this sort of projection and things like this. Again, I think there's going to be fun examples. That's a really neat one. Yeah, cool. So something kind of just to think of, and again, we even talked about this earlier when I gave you the very quick and dirty characterization of what digital art is, right? I said something like, oh, digital art is produced and or is like presented by a computational processes. But not really. No, there's some hedging, and exactly how to make sense of it is hard. So we're gonna get, I think that's a cool case. I worry about some of the cases because again, we might explode, might become too narrow. It's hard. That's the kind of fun part about it. Cool. So the last couple of things I want to mention, sorry for going so slow, has to do with less about what we gain, more about what kind of happens once we start engaging with digital works. And actually, I think maybe some of what we were just talking about can kind of come back to this. One of the things about digital works, again, not all of them, but many, are easily replicable, or they're essentially multiple instance. So what I mean by that is you can have lots of different occurrences of it. We might all be watching the same Columbo file, say. We might all be watching the same cheesy superhero movie. There can be lots of different showings of it all at the same time. Contrast that with typical paintings, which are essentially single instance. A copy isn't the same as the original painting. So why is it weird? Well, once we start dealing with easily replicable or multiple instance works, which again, digital ones aren't exclusive to, but there's going to be a whole lot more of them, it becomes hard to make sense of what counts as the original work. And not that there's anything really super duper special about the original, but Thompson-Jones in an earlier paper talks about how, look, even if we have multiple instances of the same digital image in different screens, doesn't automatically follow we're always in the presence of the actual or original artwork whenever and wherever its imagery appears on the screen. We've actually already seen one case of this, actually two cases, strictly. This one, remember I said I couldn't find a version of it that's animated, it's supposed to be animated. And the same thing too with Simons's window. I gave you a picture of it. We're not in the presence of it. We're not really appreciating it, even though we might be looking at a snapshot. Then we might think, cool, no, they're all just the same. It's all the work. It's all the same work. They're just different tokens of the same multiple instance type. This is something a lot of people might think with literature, right? Hey, I have a copy of Moby Dick. Alfred has a copy of Moby Dick. It's the same book, even though they're different copies, and they might have different properties and things like this. There's some type of being consistent here. But no, then we're already off into some interesting things about the ontologies of works. So a couple of fun things too is about how to basically curate these works. So this is Corridor. It was talked about in the SCP article, Thompson-Jones and Shelby Moser's one. In its typical presentation, it's basically a film. It's like you're walking along this corridor. It constantly just clicks through. What's weird is you can't actually see it. It's basically on a disk somewhere, probably a USB stick somewhere in the San Francisco MoMA. But there's somehow something weird about it not being visible, because it's somehow different than like, oh, we just put the painting away. Because it's not like, oh, I could sneak back in the back and like, you know, take the cover off. No, there's something really weird about it just being down to the ones and zeros on the USB stick. Same thing with Landscape Study 4. This is actually supposed to be run on a Nintendo. The best you can get now, because I think the original cartridge song got screwed up, is you can have pictured stills from it. And this is what it's gone. Did people play around with Agatha Appears much? It's an old school piece of net art, and you're supposed to kind of click through and it talks. There's a little listing in the bottom, shows you the dialogue and things. The problem is a lot of it used to be timed, and it was timed based on cycles, computer cycles. And unsurprisingly, they've gotten a hell of a lot faster. So now it goes, instead of like someone casually walking, bang, everything's screwed up. A favorite example of this with regards to digital curation is Who's This Famous? So do people know this at all? So this was a year-long art project by Markiplier and I forget the other dude. So basically they made a video every day for a year on a YouTube channel. And at the end of the year, and the exact time that would have been a year, they deleted the channel while they're streaming and deleted everything that was on it. They told all the fans to basically like, don't share any pictures from it, don't share any recordings. The point is to see if they can literally just erase from the internet something that was pretty big. The whole point is to basically aim to curate it. This is a screenshot of the very last thing. You'll notice it says, well, the little red X there, right? Chat's broken. That's because, again, this was me screenshotting it literally as it died. What I really love is that the last message is "Godbye," someone trying to say goodbye, but with a typo. So what's neat about this is it was entirely designed to basically like, hey, the internet never forgets. Let's make the internet forget. Yeah, I need it for an example, you know. So what's weird about curation, digital curation, is, again, because so much of it isn't just production, but also presentation, well, sometimes the tools we have for presentation change. And then it looks like we can't really get the work the way it was supposed to anymore. So Thompson, Jones, and Moser talk about, right, when we're thinking about net art, you might ask the person who's making it, like, hey, what do you think is really important here? A very fun case of this is Home of the Underdogs. Are anyone familiar with this? This is a digital, I'm sorry, just digital. It's a video game archive, basically. They collect just video games that are no longer under license and try and make them available. They don't bother to actually try and give you software to let them run. You're supposed to figure that out. What they will give you is all the files that the game has. So DOSBox is your friend if you're interested in these kinds of things. Another version is Ross's Game Dungeon. He goes through really old games, not necessarily always very old, but almost always games that effectively you can't play anymore. His favorite is to play games that are just on the cusp of their digital services being shut down. So there's a bunch of games as a service where once the server's shut down, cool, you just can't play this game anymore. He's got one really great video where he's playing a racing game, and as he's playing it, the servers get shut down, and it's just like, awesome. I guess I'm done with this then. That was $60 this time. Interesting cases, because again, it's highlighting the weirdness, oddities of digital curation. This isn't something we'll spend a lot of time with, but I want to mention it because it's something kind of cool. It's something that gets kind of swept under the rug when we think about digital art. So, ooh, cool. We got 8 minutes to blast through this. So that's basically it about digital art. Now, let me emphasize, all of that is super speculative. All of that is very like hand wavy, highlighting some things that are good, some things that are bad, highlighting, I think, some points that we're going to come back to as we go along. But of course, all of that's nice. It's neat to talk about digital art. We don't have any idea what the hell art is. And let me just go ahead and give you this in a super brief nutshell. Nobody knows what the hell art is. The best answer is, I don't know what art is, but I know it when I see it. It's not a very helpful one. That's probably the best or closest we're going to get with regards to a definition. So historical definitions in the philosophy of art tend to try and pick specific types of properties, being mimetic, being representational, having certain expressive features, having certain formal features. The problem is that it's pretty easy to find things that are paradigmatic non-artworks that will have these features too. Again, I'm not really going to bother going through these. We can talk about them maybe a little bit more if you like. But again, the broad thought is, cool, people have come up with suggestions about it's these properties, these are necessary and sufficient for being an artwork. Insert counterexamples, it just doesn't work. Representational is a really easy one. Like, cool, lots and lots and lots of nonfiction, lots and lots of non-artworky things are representational. Maps. Maybe even sets, we want to get really fun. When I'm doing my logic proofs, I'm doing something representational. That's not art. Another way we might go is we might go family resemblance. So the idea here is we're like, cool, so there's this thing. This is something we accept as a work of art. And if it's kind of similar to this, that's going to be what it means to be an artwork. This family resemblance account is very close to a kind of conventional one. A conventional one says, hey, what counts as art is a little bit up to the circumstances you're making the evaluation in. If you're thinking about, well, let's hash it out. So here's two versions of the conventional one. It's a little bit easier. So one conventional one is broadly institutional. And it says, hey, an artwork is an artifact of a kind created by an artist to be presented to an art world public. Now, the art world is a notion from Dante. It means something like an atmosphere of art theory. You will really quickly note this cannot be a good definition because you have to know what art is to know what the art world is. But that's kind of okay, right? Again, this is very close to that family resemblancy idea. You're going to get some things in, and then you'll use that to help you figure it out. So this institutional theory, there's also a historical theory. Artworks resemble existing or accepted artworks in various ways. So Jared Levinson suggests that artworks are intended to be regarded like prior works. I want you to think about this I've made in the same way that you've thought about these other things. And then Carroll suggests, hey, an artwork is created by an artist, right, in an artistic context with a recognized artistic intention. So there's some kind of historical process. People have already started thinking about, say, putting oil onto canvas and evaluating it aesthetically. And then I do the same thing. And that's the kind of thing. Also, I do the same thing, hoping that you will say, ooh, this is very dynamic. Ooh, this is very stated. Let's see what we're after. Again, this is not a very helpful one because you already have to know what counts as art. Or at least you've got to have some. I don't know if everybody can read the little example here. I love it. Basically, right? If it's got a little block, then it counts as art. Cool. So I mentioned the Comte de Bellamy. Here is the little thing when it was hung with it. It's got the artist. It's got the algorithm written out. The name and everything. Yeah. Please.
Because the historical one is prepared, I can't remember what it's called, but the toilet.
Duchamp, yeah, the fountain.
Yeah, that's basically, I took like one class years ago, and that was kind of like how it started, like, is this art?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that was that there's, I can't say that's art, but there's so many things that can happen that was inspired by the fountain that could define as art, and then it's interesting. Like the thing that it was based on art and everything that was inspired by it close to art than the fountain.
Yeah,
but I just love it.
it's neat. I think this is kind of, so I was making the joke about, oh, cool, the first ones don't really count. Well, maybe when people who buy this historical view will say, yeah, that's exactly what we want to say. Hey, it's a boundary case. All the stuff that comes after, that's fine. But boundary cases are fun. That's where we as philosophers get to make our money. So there's a related one from Beardsley that kind of unites the classical views with the contextual one. It's a broadly aesthetic definition. This is, hey, the intended function of an artwork is to prompt aesthetic judgments by displaying aesthetic features and artistic features. Aesthetic features are features that are kind of intrinsic to the work, so maybe some formal features of the work. And the artistic ones are the historically situated relational ones. So Duchamp's fountain would be an interesting one because it doesn't really have any aesthetic features. It's got entirely, or it's going to be based off its artistic ones. It's breaking the mold in some kind of interesting way. But I think, I mean, just to be really blunt, I very much agree with the Walton quote at the very end of the SCP article. Like, this is kind of a bad question. There probably isn't a very good universal definition of what counts as art. And that's okay. We might have different ways of doing this. We might think of art as a category. in the Waltonian way that we mentioned earlier. There's going to be variable features, there's going to be standard features, non-standard features, and that's something that can change over time. Counterexamples might come along and push us to start revising which properties go where. One thing that's lurking, though, is a lot of these views turn on the idea that there's artistic intentions. Mention that because we're going to come back and think about computer-made art. Give me 2 minutes and we'll be out of here. Okay. So, cool. That's enough of me blathering. Let's quickly mention where the hell are we going to go from here? Well, here's the idea. I'm going to try and address or spell out or maybe just say some more stuff about a bunch of the things we've talked about already. Here's the real blunt plan. Next week, we're going to talk about appreciation, art kinds, and aesthetic value. So the things we're going to be really interested in are, is there really something new when it comes to digital art? Or is it just, as Lopez calls it, old wine in new bottles? The same stuff, just with a new veneer. And similarly, we'll discuss, right, whether digital art is more, less, or equal aesthetic value to traditional art. Again, some things we've talked a little bit about. We'll go into that a little bit more depth. That's next week. 2 weeks, we're going to talk about interactivity and immersion. Our questions here are basically, what is interactivity? How do you make sense of it? What's immersiveness? How do we make sense of it? And how do these properties impact how we can appreciate a work, digital or otherwise? Then this will set up week 4. Week 4 is, I'm going to call it about authorship. Again, this is just a term. It's basically just the person who makes the art. So we'll talk about authorship, especially with regards to collaborative art, to remix, and computer authored art. So what we're going to talk about there is basically, when does someone count as an author of a work? Or one of the authors of a work? How do we fit our characterization of authorship with collaborative digital art? Who counts as the artist when it comes to remixed works? Does that even make sense? And can a computer be an artist? Or is it always going to be the computer is just a tool and the person who programmed it is the artist? So I hope you can kind of see why the interactivity stuff leads to this. Because frankly, at a certain point, interactive art starts to blur into collaborative art. It's very hard to draw the difference. So that's our first 4 weeks. After that, it's a choose your own adventure class. So after week 4, we have a break because it's going to be Carnival. Even though technically, I suspect we're probably not going to be able to go. We don't have class. When we come back, what we're going to do is look at types of digital art. And here you get to vote. Basically, just because I couldn't figure out which ones I wanted to do. And I thought it might be interesting to throw it open. So I've given you a choice of some different topics. Glitch art, basically just art made, well, either through mechanical or software glitches. Memes, we'll look at them aesthetically and also kind of just a little bit of a potted history. Augmented reality and virtual reality, NFTs, video games, voyeur gaming, which is basically watching other people play video games. Digital images, so this will be a little bit more on the Thompson Jones stuff, or the distinction between the digital and the analog. I'm happy with any of these topics. Again, the voting, I think, finishes around the 18th of February. I don't remember exactly, it says on the website. Please do vote, pick the 3 you like. Whichever wins, we're just, blunt democracy. We'll go with those. I might try and throw up some material about the other ones too. We'll sort of see how it goes. If you're interested in these, you have questions on them, please feel free, message me, email me, put stuff on the discussion forum about it. That's cool, whatever you want. We're all in this together. And of course, vote early, vote often. So yeah, that's basically it for today. Thank you guys very much. I hope this sounds kind of fun and interesting. So next week, you already know what we're going to talk about. The readings are out. Let me just mention the Carol chapter, massive. It's 100 pages. You do not have to read the whole thing. I need to scroll through it and pick out the particular pages to look at, I'll put that up. Feel free if you want to read the whole thing, go ahead. Oh God, I wish he was briefer. But yeah, give the Lopez a read. I'll put up exactly what to read for Carol. Thanks guys for coming. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you guys for coming. I'm gonna shut the Zoom and everything down.